Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
The economy. At the best of times, it can be a challenge to predict. But throw in a pandemic, and what approach to forecasting do we take? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been one consistent message from veteran economic forecaster, Professor Neville Norman. He's advised that there's no predicting our economic future with any accuracy without considering the impact of the virus on our everyday lives and businesses. Because, of course, things can go in all sorts of directions. Neville has said as much in recent times when offering multiple scenarios in his economic forecasting. Nothing can be taken for granted. And now we have the vaccine rollout. Not as smooth as we might have hoped. Lockdowns and restricted movement may be less likely, let's hope. But Neville warns of a psychological barrier now in place to hinder our activities. Meanwhile, the 2021 federal budget is rapidly approaching. What's that going to tell us? Neville offers his broad economic perspective to Heather Dawson, starting with his view that the impact of the virus dominates everything.
Indeed, and reluctantly, I have to say that, because for more than a year it's been the backdrop to all of this, but not the virus directly. It's been the government restrictions, and they've now been replaced by a psychological barrier within that, which is causing reluctance of people to do things that they would have done before the virus. So while the vaccine rollout has recently hit unexpected supply and psychological barriers, the economic outlook manifested in demand for things and services that you and your businesses produce has thankfully been little affected by it, unless those restrictions I mentioned go back on, a limited likelihood, or the proposed liberation of them, like international travel bans, get delayed, and I think that's a bit more likely. For over a year, I've stressed the need to map from the virus-to-virus policies to economic effects, and Heather, I remain concerned about the enduring effects of long-term compression in international travel and migration. As I look at my forecast numbers and those of many of my economist colleagues, I see little reason to change much of the overall picture that I've recently given you of recovery close to 4% growth, with better prospects for many of you doing businesses in Australia. Not all, I'll come to that. And as you'll notice, the housing and stock markets are charging on, and I expect that to continue. My concerns, Heather, are that travel and migration will be restricted for longer than most economy watchers have believed, and that psychological barriers now work to limit people's desire to go back into the main cities and spend there, and that will go through well into 2022. Just a couple of specifics. Office renting. Not great news for owners of big office blocks. Good news for some tenants, but that is going to endure for some time. Travel. We've seen the resumption of domestic travel, and by golly, some of those motel prices have shown the effect of it. That's okay, that's the market, and good luck to them. But international travel I expect to be further delayed. And tertiary education, only the older, well-endowed institutions, older universities like mine, are able to withstand this. This is not going to come back quickly. So despite my general optimism for continued recovery, and I think this every time I hear, well, isn't it great, unemployment is only 5%, spare a thought for those specifics.
And all the while, Neville, of course, we've been operating in an incredibly low interest rate environment. So tell us your perspectives on that.
Oh, very controversial, Heather, the interest rate scene. Well, while the Reserve Bank, which I used to call the reverse bank, but there's no reversing at the moment, keeps official rates near zero, which means that what borrowers actually pay stay low but not zero, and while lenders lend so freely and borrowers see no near prospect of rate rises, which is encouraged by official almost promises to that effect, speculative markets will surge, and if interest rates do rise down the track, the thump in financial and then real economic activity will be harder. That's a warning. I have to issue the warning and make the case for care in all things financial. And just because I join my colleagues in predicting continued low interest rates for a while, that does not mean the warning is not real. Imagine in 2022 or 2023 a surging economy with the Reserve Bank needing to raise rates to meet its formal responsibilities in the Reserve Bank Act of 1959. Rate rises work better in curbing a speculative uplift than low and cut rates do in stimulating the economy, as we've seen over the last 2 years. Please consider that.
Now, Neville, the May federal budget is just around the corner. And talking of speculation, would you care to speculate what's in store?
That is real speculation, Heather, and as any and all of the numbers in this coming federal May 2021 budget presentation are more guesswork than ever before. So expect some gloating comments on how well we've done compared with where we might have been, with the government forgetting the almost balanced budget scene of 2 years ago, now buried in history. Some budget watchers will still panic at the size of the debt and these huge numbers of funding requirements, and here the government has to set a fine line between pretending there is no issue and creating panic with continued big numbers. The recent apparent decline in confidence in our federal leaders on so many matters, Heather, does not help in this task. So we enter dangerous times that will interact with the virus-based pessimism. My take is to enter an optimistic note that the budget funding issue, note this please, is helped by a growing economy and record low interest rates. Please do not measure indebtedness by debt-to-income ratios or debt-to-GDP. Look at servicing ratios, and they are much more tractable for you and the economy.
Righto. Well, summing up then, Neville, in this current interesting economic environment, I believe you have some watchouts for us.
Indeed, as we surge towards winter, I have a list of things that you might hear that could attract or worry you, that in my research-based judgment need to be either disregarded or put into a broader context. 1. Desperate competitors and genuine businesses like you, not fully conversant with your legal rights. If that's the case, watch out. Huge budget deficit and debt numbers, as just mentioned, without accompanying information on how much more tractable is the financing costs of them. And the next one, a very big point, targets. Targets tantamount to promises, particularly by government ministers and bodies, whether or not on the vaccine rollout, on interest rates, or any key economic variable. They shouldn't do it. Extremist economic forecasts and, most of all, persistent assertions from people who should know better that benefits outweigh costs or vice versa, when the benefits and costs are measured on different and inconsistent number scales, as in the vaccine controversies. My advice? Be brave, be aware, and be relevantly different in what you offer.
That was Melbourne University Associate Professor of Economics, Neville Norman. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Executive producer is Heather Dawson. Producers are Nick Schilberger, Chris Ashmore, and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more B Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.